take the example of Ramayana. Ramayana has so many interpretations,
Mm-hmm.
so many of them, and they evolved over 4,000, 5,000 years. In every language, every poet have written it in their way.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It's great to have you here with me today. And one thing I really wish we had is the Native American way of naming people or identifying people, because I feel we're too bound by labels right now. We're too caught up with the brands that we associate with. And as a result, the brands kind of give us this vested sense of importance or this sense of achievement based on the quality or the price of the brand that you are seen wearing or driving or using at home. And as a result, it creates this cycle which is very hard to escape from. And as a result, you have these names and these labels that we identify with, which then further kind of make that attachment stronger, right? Whether it's the kind of food you eat, and as a result you identify with a certain group of people who eat that food, or you do a certain kind of sport, and as a result the equipment is endorsed by this brand who further enhances your visibility within that group. And I think if we're done with it, I think it will go one step in the right direction of breaking down these ideas of separating us from each other and making us feel more important or less important, or more successful or less successful. And I don't know, until we try it, we won't know. Or was there ever a time where there was this kind of, what's the word? Is it egalitarian, or is it this level? I don't know. Is this kind of heading towards communism? Is where everything is stripped down and we're just kind of told by the state what to do, what to eat, what to wear, and everyone makes the same amount of money, and there's only one place where you can spend it. No boxes of food have brands on it. It's just a tomato is a tomato. And maybe that's what a slow way of living will look like. Is it? Or is capitalism got the potential of bringing us down to a level where we aren't kind of shitting on someone else to feel better about ourselves, or having this constant pursuit of a better way of life or a better sense of value in society based on what other people perceive you as? And coming to the Native Americans, right, the names they gave, like Longfeet or Fast Runner or Missing Coyote, or whatever the names they had, I think there's something to it if we can revamp the system, because it could be like Cheating CEO, or that's everyone. That's not fair, is it? It's not fair. There are some good CEOs who are manipulative, not cheating. And then you have other things, right? Like I don't know, in any field, if you just take a moment now, and I don't want to sort of impose my names, which I think are fucking fantastic to start with, on you, but I think you can put your own name. Like I was just thinking, I'm going grey in the beard, and that's why I kind of trim it, because I don't care, frankly, but maybe I'll be seen as older than my age because grey is associated with that. But I think I love grey because, unlike black and white, which is associated with extremes, with dark and light, or with good and bad, and all sorts of themes that we see, I think there's this sense of grey in opinions as well, where there's this place where you are with the possibility of change, with the possibility of communication, with the possibility of re-evaluating where you stand. And I think grey, of course, 50 Shades of Grey being the best book I've ever read, yeah, is a great color. Even suits, grey suits look really cool. I think grey is a really good color. So maybe I'll be Greybeard or Grey Stubble. I think that's a good name, because I think grey adds wisdom to what you're saying. I think black and white have been either celebrated or demonized too much. And I think grey is the new shade, or the new place, or the new midpoint. And I think I'd be happy to be called Greybeard, and maybe not Sandeep Rao or SoapyRao, and that would be a conversation starter, if nothing else, right? Because, maybe it's obvious, people are like, oh, that's Greybeard. Why is he called Greybeard? Because he's got a grey beard. Well, no, is there more to that story than just Greybeard? Like, I don't know. Will people be more curious? Because if it's more obvious, like, saggy something or missing toe, there should be a way of giving more depth to these names. Because the moment you talk about your name, they're automatically, I think it's gotten a little lazy. Of course, the new hybrid names where it's like, it means mist of the rose, or it means, skipping frog. But the name which you give then, are these names in society where you hear all the time. Like, of course, the old names, like which I have, like Sandeep or Rahul or Rohit or Karthik, or for women you have Priya and you have Preeti and you have Shilpa, and why am I reading out names, or why am I mentioning names? But to break the system of names, because we've got hybrid names, which a lot of people are using, and which a lot of people go into these in-depth studies to find and shortlist and then name their child, and people are like, what does your kid's name mean? But I think that's going to get boring and old soon. So we should be prepared for a time when these new hybrid names, and even the old names associated with gods, and also the names that were given down and passed down by our ancestors, all those are exhausted. We need to go back to the OG, the original way of naming, which was the Native Americans, right? Running Coyote, or overweight golden doodle. Let's keep it hybrid, man. If you're keeping hybrid, or a labradoodle, or like a luscious labradoodle, or a what do we call the vegans? Because they have their own category, right? Like almond cheese enthusiast, or I don't know. There's so many, right? Or the tofu. The tofu tantalist. I don't know. There's so many options. There's so many opportunities which we need to explore. And I think feed some of this shit into ChatGPT and let's see what it spits out, because I think it might have some good options. I don't know if there's enough data out there. But long story short, that's another great name for a person who doesn't shut up, is because people do that, right? Oh, it's a long story short. 20 minutes later, they're not done. They're just going on. And I just dread to know what the long version of that short story was, because it's never fucking ending. And I realize many people can't tell a story because they take a story which is actually interesting and bore the fuck out of it. And we see that. And we see that on TEDx platforms, especially. And I'm not going to unnecessarily shit on Indians for this, but I am, because we tend to have this ability, this innate talent to make interesting stuff boring. And when we give TED Talks or TEDx Talks, we make it all about our achievement, about our resume, and about how we've done this and how you should do it as a result, instead of spinning a story which is interesting for everyone. So long story short, if they are called for a TEDx Talk, you know not to go, because they say, long story short. And then they talk about how their parents were trying to force them to be engineers, and then they said, I'm going to be an engineer, but then the light struck them and they said, in this engineering field I'm going to become the grade A student even though I didn't want to. Long story short. But then you have someone who's just called a snippet. I would like to talk to a snippet. Now let me talk about the story which is at hand and which is of importance on today's episode, because I'm talking to a storyteller, an author, a columnist, a screenwriter. I've got Anand Neelakantan as my guest on today's episode, and you're in store for a really, really fun, insightful conversation, because Anand is the author of many best-selling books, inspired from Hindu mythology, based on ancient texts like the Vedas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and his interpretation are taken the form of books like the Asuras. I think it's called Asura, then the other one called the Ajaya series. And I actually read Roll of the Dice, which is the first one in the Ajaya series. And I really liked his take on things, which is not this typical idea of good and bad, but the possibility of good people doing bad things and the possibility of bad people, or rather the reality of bad people doing good things for the situation in that moment, what is demanded of them for duty and for service to community, to their family, to their people. So there's so many themes that can really, really bring what we are experiencing in today's world to light. And we speak about other things like where India was, in the past that we come from, the present where we are, and the possible futures where we can go, and the need to be aware of pride. It can be good, but it can also be something that can be our downfall. And you know what's so amazing talking to someone like Anand is that the knowledge that they have is not just spout out, but it's also taken the form of wisdom, which can be used to shape the way we look at life today. And that's something which the ancient texts, the ancient Indian texts, are so good at. They're not a closed manual telling you how to live, but they're open books which are open to interpretation, which can be looked at and not just followed blindly, but how we can use some of these themes, some of the wisdom in these books to shape the way we go forward and shape our lives and make us look at what we are doing and give context to where we are and what we want to do and shape our future as a country going forward. So a lot of interesting themes, a lot of knowledge and wisdom from Anand, and frankly a really, really good conversation. And I'm excited for you to join Anand and me on this journey of talking about the past, the present, and possibly the future. Thank you. Anand, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm extremely excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for calling me for the SoapyRao show.
Thank you.
Should I call you Soapy? Should I call you Rao? Should I call...
You can call me Sandeep. You can call me Sandeep. That's yeah. Yeah, that's people sometimes just don't even ask that question. They're like, so tell me, Soapy. I'm like, hey, how did you know? So there was something very interesting you were telling me about, which I didn't know, and which I was a little sensitive about before we started this recording. So when we call it the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, many people say that's the wrong pronunciation because that's a South Indian pronunciation, but the actual pronunciation is Ramayan or Mahabharat. But you were saying that's incorrect.
There is nothing called South Indian or North Indian. I don't know what is South Indian because it is not one entity. First, let us address that. There are 5 states in South India. It include Goa, 6. Because earlier, technically, they used to include Goa also.
Right.
Whether Goa people like it or not. And before that, Dakshin means anything below the Vindhya mountain. So even Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh and Odisha perhaps would have come in the earlier Dakshinavarta in our Puranas. That apart, when the British people translated Sanskrit text, they had no agenda to change the names, right? They are not going to make it into a North Indian, South Indian or anything. They were all, many of them who translated it, they were scholars in Sanskrit. You can debate about their agenda, how they translated it, how they did not translate, but they translated it exactly true to how it is pronounced in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit, it is always Rama, it is Ravana, it's never Ravan. Usually when you are using proper names, they will put that 2 dots, if you know a bit of Sanskrit. So it's always with Rama, Ravana, it's never Ram or Ravan. So what essentially is many of the North Indian languages, they cut what is that and say Ram. But in Sanskrit, it is Rama only. And in Malayalam and Tamil, you add something, Raman or Ramar or Ramayanam or Rama. It's never Ramayana. But Kannada and Telugu perhaps are the 2 languages which is very true to Sanskrit, especially when you talk about the names in our Puranas.
Interesting.
Apart from English. English also is very true.
Right.
Both Malayalam, Tamil and Hindi are wrong. I won't say wrong. It's conventions are different. There is nothing wrong or right about this.
It's either a condensation or an extension of the word. Right. No, what I find intriguing with this entire evolution of, or rather, deciphering of Sanskrit to these modern languages we use today across the Indian across the nation, is that it seems to have diversified the across the length and breadth of the country, but it also seems to have divided the country in some way on a cultural level, on a interpretation of the ancient text level. So before this happened, and when Sanskrit was the predominant language of the land, what was the situation of the geographical unity or disunity in the land?
I think Sanskrit always, Sanskrit ceased to be a common man's language long ago. But Sanskrit was always a link language, a scholar's language.
Right.
So people had, just like how we use English now, Sanskrit served that purpose. Now most of the research papers across the world, at least most parts of the world, they have an English version.
Yeah.
Basically because perhaps America has been dominating in the scientific research and other things. So there, once upon a time, it was Sanskrit, and most scholars, irrespective of which parts of the country they are coming from, they used to speak Sanskrit and communicate with that. How did Shankaracharya travel across India when already all these languages, most of these languages would have evolved? In the north, it would have been different forms of Prakrit. In south, already all the 4 classical languages had evolved by that time. At least Kannada, Telugu and Tamil had evolved, and Malayalam was at the process of evolving from Tamil. But in spite of that, it's the Sanskrit is going for Digvijaya and going to all parts of the country. Same with other saints from Vallabhacharya, after that from Bengal, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So all these people, irrespective of what language they spoke at home, at the scholarly level, it was always Sanskrit as a link language. For a brief period, Persian would have served as a link language, at least among the North Indian states when the Mughal rule was there, which was later official language, sometimes was Persian. Then slowly Urdu replaced it in the north. In the south, all the four languages became the state languages of the respective kingdoms. But for all practical purposes, Sanskrit was used, including many of the Tamil kingdoms. It doesn't mean that the other language didn't have the respect which it deserved, because these are all like, these are not any dialects or anything. No? Like Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Odia, all these are classical languages in India. As per the government definition itself, these are all classical languages, which has a tradition of at least 1,000 years to 1,500 years, some of them having 3,000, 4,000 years of tradition.
So now I want to understand.
There is no question of division. No,
there's no
division came when politicians started playing around with it. When one side said that, no, you have to forget all our language, you have to use our language because we are majority, you should use that. And the other side politicians started countering it, saying that, no, we won't learn that language, whether it's good for us or not, and we will have our own language. I think all these things may get irrelevant with technology. It's not very far. In maybe another 2 or 3 years, perhaps you speak in Kannada and I hear it in Malayalam. And the people who want to hear it in English will hear it in English.
With the translation software, it's happening.
Already the translation softwares are available. It's a matter of they're getting popular and cheaper.
So can you paint a picture of the time that you are writing in and writing about, say 3,500 years back, whether it's with reference to, I'm sorry here, I might seem inaccurate with the time frame, or my lack of knowledge might come out here. But when, say, you're talking about Rama and Ravana and that epic, or the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, so what was the land looking like? What was ancient India, ancient India's position in the global order? And more close to home, what did India look like as a nation at that time?
See, nation as a concept is very recent, right? Nation, whether we can call nation, because people, whether anybody identified as particular nation is a very difficult question to answer. I don't think so, because politically the kingdoms come and kingdoms go, the borders change, and they evolve and dissolve, coagulate. It keeps happening in the history. Only thing is, what bound it together is a form of culture.
Right. And
I won't say one particular culture, because there could have been so much cultural diversity also, but the concept of dharma, certain things are very common. Because for all the religions and the thought process which evolved from India, which we now perhaps call collectively as Hinduism, or which are all recent terms actually, or collectively as Hinduism, or form of Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism, all these things, there are certain common factors which united. Other than that, all of them had their own regional varieties, and even now we can see that there is no one form of Hinduism, there is no one form of God or one text or anything. So it is a very naturally evolved process, and India was and is the most fertile land in the world. So naturally, as long as it didn't depend on the modern industrialization process, it's quite natural that it was the most wealthiest land in the world, because the economy depends on agriculture, and when agriculture is there, naturally you will have spare time, then arts will develop. When you have arts and other things, along with that, the religion, culture, philosophy. When does the philosophies evolve? When you have got enough time to sit and think and wonder about the world, isn't it? It won't evolve in a place where there is a constant conflict and you are struggling for your livelihood. These are all the things of civilization is a product of leisure, actually. So leisure will come when there is prosperity. And the prosperity will come in those world. Prosperity will come from fertility of the land. We have got so many rivers, we were geographically blessed. And because of that, we became economically powerful. And because we were economically powerful and the land could give us plenty of food to eat, we had enough time to develop a much more open and liberal-minded attitude. I become closed when I am scared, right? When the resources are less. When I have enough and more resources, there are two things which can happen. One is a lot of invaders will come who want to take away the land and enjoy the resources. Second thing is, you yourself will be easy to share it with all and they will be more broad-minded. So Indian religions, Indian thought processes were more or less broad-minded in accepting different paths because there was no existential threat for it for a long time, for centuries. So that way, we were blessed to have a very prosperous land, and it remained prosperous until perhaps the colonialization started, which coincided with the industrial revolution in the Europe. So these two things acted. We became a place where they came and used us for raw material. The older form of industrialization, it's also a misnomer. It's also a misunderstanding to say that India was never industrialized. At the eve of British Raj, India was the most industrialized country in the world. But there was no mass production as such. It was mostly caste-based, guild-based industries, but we had a very complicated and rich industrial base consisting of cottage industries and other things. Like every guild will produce whatever it is, exquisite things we used to produce. All these things were systematically destroyed by the British. An inferiority complex was infused on us, and scientific revolution happened in Europe, which is something which many times we miss. They didn't think about the past. They thought about the future. They became very rational in their thought. They came out of the clutches of their religion, and the industrial production started. Apart from that, they were smart enough and cruel enough and ruthless enough to exploit the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And now they are a normalizing force. Whatever norms they give, they impose that norms on everyone else. Whatever it is, their culture, they impose on everyone else. And if you don't follow that, the standards which they set, they say you're developing, underdeveloped, you are yet to develop, semi-crude, and all those things. So these are all historical accidents which happened across.
So I want to, for a moment, come back from history to today's India, because, I completely relate to your observation about the inferiority complex and the norms being applied, because generationally you notice, whether it's my parents' generation or my generation, there's need for validation from the West, right? Whether it's approval about the way you speak, whether it's getting educated abroad. But now I'm 40, it's 2023, and we are seeing this resurgence of Indian dominance, I wouldn't say dominance, but Indian power on the global front. And you see this embracing of Indian pride, and that could be in language, it could be in food, it could be in clothing, it could be in expression and ideas amongst a lot of the younger population. So for a moment now we can see India on the cusp of something which a lot of people speculate as the next big power on the global stage. So for a moment, so could you take me through maybe a contrast of what was you just said about where we were thousands of years back to what your observations on present day India are?
See, we are at the cusp of something big. It could go either way. I will put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
We could go to reach, India could achieve its true potential. It can go to achieve so many people, 150 crore, 160 crore people. Mm-hmm. We can become perhaps one of a stabilizing force in the world, offer a different way based on our roots and ethics, on an inclusive way of living. That is the biggest message of India. So much diversity we could handle. Any other country with this kind of diversity, any other geography with this kind of diversity, you can see across the world, they have ended up in huge wars and bloodshed. We have so far managed to restrict those kind of bloodsheds. It's not that bloodsheds never happen here, because it's human nature sometimes to be violent. But we have so far avoided that. So we can continue like this. We can continue to be inclusive. We can continue to accept the differences in thoughts, and like how Hinduism is. Hinduism, if you really see, is an umbrella religion. It has got so many conflicting thoughts and contradicting methods, yet it accepts and respects everything. And that is how it has gone forward and survived and flourished. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is this kind of the pride, what we are feeling, it can go rotten also. Because where do you stop it? If you think that we are the best, one is swinging to the what we were like. We need validation from the West. We are inferior. We feel inferior. To swinging to the other end and saying that we are the greatest in the world. We were the greatest in the world, and we have nothing to learn from anyone else. And our language. Moment we say that, the question comes whose language? Question comes whose religion? Question comes whose God? Because in Hinduism itself, there is no one way of worshipping, right? There are so many schools and streams, and that's the beauty of this religion. The moment you try to unify it in a very 17th century, 18th century, or pre-World War European way, where a nation can be unified only by having one religion, one language, one way of thought, one this thing. This led to the things like fascism. This led to the European countries becoming each nation for its own and fighting with each other, and led to different kind of world wars and conflicts and other things. Whereas India, which is having much more diversity compared to Europe, always managed it by having a very open heart. The moment we close our heart with our rightful or unrightful or imaginary pride, can also go in the way of conflicts like what we witnessed in 1947, where each side said that our side is right, and we almost managed to kill what Hitler killed. We almost managed to kill almost 15 to 20 lakhs people in our civil war. It wasn't very far away when you see the history, hardly 75 years before. We killed around, we butchered with hockey sticks and knives, not even guns. Imagine such a civil war happening now. So we have to think on either side. We always, it will not be, nations can turn either way at this cusp. We are at the cusp of something. We can go to greatness, which we all hope and pray we will reach there. We can also go into balkanization and fights and other things which we pray should not happen, which we should work, it should not happen. So the moment you talk about pride of language, India has so many languages. It's not just the 22 languages which is in the schedule. We have got more than 300 to 400 languages. Each village starts claiming pride. Each caste starts claiming pride on itself. Each gotra starts claiming pride on its heritage. Where do we end? So it's very important to tell us a story. It's all storytelling. Nation building also is a storytelling. We need to tell a story where there is place for everyone.
There's a sense of lost times, right? When I think about what you said about how we need all of this to make a nation or make a civilization flourish, which is work, which could either be agriculture, it could be any form of economy, to spiritual seeking or philosophical pondering, or arts or music. And today it seems with the technological revolution, the time seems to be something that no one has, or rather the attention for gaining information has reduced, right? Because everything has gone from hours to nanoseconds in some way. So is this a hybrid, rapid progress of a nation that you're looking at? Because when you research for your books and you study these ancient texts, of course, you can't say, the past is always glorious. There is a need for change, and change is inevitable. And we are sitting where we are today. We can't obviously transport ourselves back to 3000 BC. So what are some of the things that we can apply? Because the moment you talk about the past in India, especially, the demons come up. People point fingers. There's accusations. The caste systems, the upper caste is always oppressed, or there's religious institutions that has stolen people's livelihood or has prevented people from coming up in life. So there's always pointing fingers, or it's the other extreme, as you rightly pointed, where it's like, oh, India invented yoga. India is the greatest country. There seems to be more of this extreme views about the past. But
I think that's a problem of the social media. Social media always there's a context collapse. There cannot be any nuanced discussion now. It has to be either this or the other extreme. Either India is all the entire Indian civilization was a lie, and we were all everything that is good that came from the West, or the other extreme. We had atom bombs and nuclear bombs, and we were flying around to Mars. Kind of both are ridiculous, if you ask me.
Right. But social media is there. We can't ignore the fact that it does have an influence, especially now with the reach of social media. There are people who are unwilling to read the texts that are out there. They're willing to be manipulated by a certain narrative, by a certain political group or a certain social group or a certain community that they belong to. So as a result, we can't ignore the presence and the influence of social media. So how does someone like you, who's a scholar in many ways, who writes stories about these ages, how do you navigate your storytelling? Because it's easy for you to be taken out of context, or for your stories to be used by a certain group in a certain weaponized way. So what do you make of this?
There is, fortunately, not many people read in India. That's first thing.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Unfortunately or fortunately, not many people read in India. Compared to our population, very less people read.
Right.
So I don't think the writers are that important in the country,
Right.
except in their heads. That's first thing. It's a fact. Let us accept the fact. No? Compared to for our population, and especially people now, India might be the only country where people proudly say, no, I don't read any fiction. I don't read anything. I don't have time to read. When I have time, I will read. Many of the countries across the world which has got very far lesser population sell more books and people read more.
Yeah.
And they have enough time to do that. So that is one safety when you write anything. Since people don't read, very less number of people read. The kind of things what you say about that risk is less. Jokes apart, but that's a fact also. Jokes apart, you can't write for social media. You can't write being scared that somebody will caught you out of context and then create ruckus. Though people who want to create ruckus can create ruckus on anything and everything. People created ruckus on some actors' bikini also, right? So there is nothing. There is no dearth of things in India where people, and there is no dearth of unemployed, WhatsApp-inspired, crazy people in India who can agitate for anything and everything. So you can't lead your life depend upon that. You stay true to what you want to say and say it boldly. And if something happens, let us see at that time. That's only approach to take. Or you'll have to give up doing anything altogether and just be the slogan shouting rat led by the Pied Pipers. It's our choice. Whether you want to be the rat following the Pied Pipers, whichever party or denomination or class or caste they belong to, or you want to stand apart and watch these poor rats going to get drowned. It's a choice which we'll have to make.
Well said.
But one thing is that what we should not forget, and what we are unfortunately forgetting, is that while all the din is there about India becoming great and India becoming richer and richer, which is true, and which also gives us a lot of pleasure and a sense of pride, we should not forget to look around. Even now, almost 70% of the people are living in dire poverty. We are yet to solve many of the other problems. It doesn't mean that we should solve all those things and then only we should think about any other great things. All these things will go hand in hand. Every country developed like that. But even now, our literacy rates are very bad. Many parts of the country, even now it is 40% illiterates are there, 35% illiterates are there. And not just literacy, in many other aspects. as per, I'm not quoting any UN report or anything, I'm quoting Niti Aayog report itself.
Yeah.
It's a government's statistics, and I am sure government is also aware of this fact. It's not that people at the top are not aware of the fact; they are working towards it. What many of the social media warriors forget is that this is also a reality for many of the people away
Yeah.
from the media and other things. If you take by the sheer numbers, we will have more poor than any other country's population. Even if 30% of us are poor, that is
That's a lot of
something
people.
like 50 crore, which is more than America's 1.5 times America's population. So what are we talking about overtaking anyone else?
Right.
Only when we are able to take all these people together and assure them a dignified life. We have the world's maximum number of malnourished people, malnourished children even now. As for the government statistics, I'm not talking about any agency, NGO or anything. Anybody who
Right.
has doubt can go to Niti Aayog report and see. So this is a harsh fact which government also is aware, and government also state governments, national governments, union government, all of them are coming up with a lot of schemes. But there's a long way to go.
Yeah.
So it's not a bit criticism against any party or any politician or anything, but this is like a self-criticism, a mirror which we have to look at ourselves when we are going gaga about India's progress. Is that a huge number of people are still at the bottom. There are historical reasons for that. But that should not be an excuse after 75 years of independence. Where are our priorities?
And it's a population very easily forgotten in debates, in literary fests or in government arguments, right? Because it's invisible in many ways, which is the sad part.
Who wants to talk about poverty? It has gone out of fashion, right?
Yeah.
And it is not a pleasant thing. Social media, again, I will call it as a culprit because this is one place where we all come and show our best faces, no? The best filters, the best dress in the happiest moment of our life. So it gives a very golden dust coated view of reality.
Yeah.
So what happens is, even when we tend to cover up our warts, we tend to cover up our poverty and other things with huge flexes, cover up the slums,
Yeah.
and wash the highways and put gardens in the highways, which is also required. I'm not saying they are not required.
Yeah.
But the problem is, which are all essential for this. But you cannot go forward when 30 crore people cannot go forward with 100 crore left behind.
Yeah.
Or 120 crore left behind.
It just weighs you down. I mean, whether you like it or not.
It is going to weigh you down. It's going to come after you one day or another. It will cause social strife.
So
sooner or later.
I want to, again, go back in time, because this is something which is very interesting to me, are the texts, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, are these real accounts of what happened, or are they stories told by, fictional authors of the day?
How does it matter is my first question.
Right.
Because I know from where these kind of questions are coming from. This comes from a desperate search for glory in the past. And not particularly about you, I'm talking about generally when we tell it is. Because if you go by the text, there are countless Ramayanas which have happened we don't have a linear history. As per our belief, these things keeps on happening. So if you go by the Ramayana text, it is like that the Ramayanas are happening, many Ramayanas are happening across multiple universes at different stages. That's the first thing. So you
That's
go
amazing,
into quantum physics and metaphysics and not to history when you really read the text. So what happens is, the Ramayana, what we know now, is not the first Ramayana. Millions of Ramayanas have happened before that, as per the text itself. Millions will happen again, and millions are happening now at different places. So it is immaterial on so and so BC, so and so date this happened, because we have enough history without making all these things into history. There could have been some kernel of history into it. But that is not the idea of these texts. These texts are written with a much higher purpose. It is not just a tale of some king fighting another king. We had enough kings We have enough kings fighting with each other in the last 4,000, 5,000 years for us.
Yeah.
Ramayana is not a tale of just one king against another, or Mahabharata is not a tale of two cousins fighting each other. They have got much more deeper meaning, and we should not reduce them. We are actually doing an injustice trying to make them into some sort of a historical event and trying to take pride in that. What do you take pride in Mahabharata? It's a cautionary tale. It's such a great tale warning about the problem of war.
And this is where my ignorance might have come across. Sorry, that's why I asked you the question. Is it was not loaded with, oh, let's get you to rave about Indian past, but I want to understand the idea, because this is where it was coming from. This is where my ignorance showed, I suppose. Is that what when I said real, is that if at face value, as you said, it's about a king saving his queen from a enemy, right? Very simplified way. But I wanted you to actually answer the profound, or if you want to call it the higher purpose of these texts, like not the actual historical recounting of these texts, but what does it serve to? Why does
historically it doesn't have any? If you ask me, it is much beyond the history, because it shaped our art. Both these texts and many of the Puranas shaped our art, it shaped our religion, it shaped our culture, it shaped our all kind of, like poetry it shaped, drama it shaped, sculptures it shaped, temple building it shaped our lives, how we lead our life. So this is where the importance comes from. No, people have drawn inspiration not from historical characters in India. They have drawn inspiration from these epics. So this is what unites India, rather than political unity or one language unity. So you see Ramayanam is there in almost all Indian languages. Every Indian language, there are two things which we can observe. One is most of the people who wrote, most of the saint poets who wrote Ramayana in the respective language, whether it is Kannada or Telugu or Malayalam or Odia or Bangla, Marathi, Gujarati, Tamil, they are mostly considered as the father of that language, or the Mahakavi of that language. Like Malayalam's father is Ezhuthachan, the modern Tamil's father is Kambar. Like that, it goes on and on and on everywhere. Most of the Jnanapith Award winners have written something on Ramayana or Mahabharata and won awards for that. Kuvampu, in Kannada itself, I think 2 or 3 people have won Jnanapith based on this thing. Ramayana Mahavrikshamu in Telugu. Malayalam, Randamudam, MT was 7 Nines. So it is shaping our culture and thought process even now.
Right.
Which is what is more important for me, rather than it is just a historical event of kings. So many kings we had. How many kings we had? From Chandragupta Maurya to Ashoka to Vikramaditya to Rajaraj Chola to the Chalukyas to Puligeshi to so many kings we had. Shivaji. So these two epics are beyond all these kings, if you really see. So they shape the ethics of India. They shape the concept of dharma in India. What is dharma? The debate on dharma. That is what these tales are about. And they are not instructional tests. They are not equivalent of Bible or Quran.
Okay,
no offense to any of other religious texts, but how this differs is that they are not instructional texts that you do like this and you do like that or you will get punished.
Right.
They are the tales of human frailties, humans facing different kind of dilemmas, that is dharma sankats, what they call dharma sangada, and taking decisions based on their logic and their teaching and paying the price for their actions or eating the fruits of their action.
Right.
It is an eternal debate, Ramayana or Mahabharata, and this debate had shaped Indian thought, Indian art, Indian religions, or should I say Bharatiya thoughts, Bharatiya religions today. That's also fine.
Right. I want to interrupt you for a moment, because you mentioned that this is not narrowed down to a king or kings, and it's beyond, and it serves a much higher purpose. and it goes to being a guide, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, to shape a nation or to shape many generations to come, because of the idea that it's not narrow, it's not restricted, it's not instructional like other texts out there, but just by virtue of it being so open to interpretation, because it talks about much bigger human themes of existence, of suffering, of right and wrong, and of duty, and all these various things that aren't restricted to one group of people, one race of people. It's across the human experience. But just by being open to so much interpretation, does it leave itself vulnerable to these narrow-minded people who shape it into their own narrative that they then use to manipulate present-day groups or past groups or future groups?
Actually, it is the other way around, right? It's the other way around. If it is a restrictive text, saying that this is the text, you deviate from this, then you will get killed. Right. You have done a blasphemy. That is where the manipulation happens. One group of people can hold on to that. One institution can hold on to that. So Europe came out of that institutional clutches of churches. Though there was not one church, it also split into many churches depending on various interpretations, because that's human nature. But in spite of that, there was an authority which tried to control it, and the European Renaissance was about coming out of it with free will and thought, which took the humanity forward. Whereas we inherently have that kind of Renaissance imbibed in our civilization itself, where you are allowed this kind of free thoughts. So there was no need of rebellion of, say, perhaps Galileo's and other people, no, where there was a conflict between the science, the free thought, and the church. There was no need for that. The religion itself permitted religion. I won't call it religion. This way of life itself permitted all kind of thoughts. And how does a country develop? It develops through interpretation, right? Yeah. When there are a lot of ideas, only the society progresses. The stagnant societies hold on to one idea, one interpretation. Developed society is a society which progresses. Take Europe, for example. I am no fan of Europe, because Europe is one country which colonized half the world, institutionalized slavery, and had a lot of bloodsheds and other things. But what makes them unique? What made them unique? From a plague-infested, backward region in the medieval era, what made them, we had to learn from their history also, what made them conquer most of the world and rule them and become rich at the expense of so many others? They were able to, if you really see, just before the Battle of Plassey, if somebody would have told that England is going to be the biggest power for the next 150 years, people would have thought you are mad. Isn't it? It is like saying to someone now that Burma is as insignificant. No offense to Burmese. Burma is going to be, in next 50 years, Burma is going to be the superpower. It was as accidental and as that. Right. But was it really an accident? No. See the 18th century, 19th century Europe. So many thoughts come, so many conflicting thoughts come, so many contradictory thoughts come. There is a space for all kind of inquiry. There is a space for coming out of the clutches of religion. It is such a vibrant period where people go on exploration, people are curious about things. They are not saying, my England is great 1,000 years ago and I will do exactly like that. 1,000 years ago, they were not great. So they developed because of a scientific temper. And then they created the story of how great the Rome was and other things. I'm not saying Rome was not great, but you take the size of Greece civilization. These are all city-states. The contemporary civilization in Asia at that time were massive, huge, and much richer. Whether it is India or Persia or China. But when the Europe became powerful, they created and they narrated a history which made the entire world believe that everything started from Greece. Even now when you read scientific books which comes in English, they all caught to some Greek philosopher who said this, Plato what he said, Aristotle what he said. They'll caught to all those things. Without even acknowledging that all these thoughts had appeared in India and China and Persia and Egypt thousands of years before Plato or Aristotle had said. They were just echoing what they learned from other parts. They all assign it to the Greek civilization and the Roman civilization as if everything started from there. This they were able to achieve because they progressed materialistically, they progressed in science. What we are missing now is due to our obsessiveness about an imaginary past. We have a great
Yeah.
past. But should we be stuck in the great past? The past has good and bad things. Should we not think about the future? And if you want to think about the future, we need all kind of interpretations. We need all kind of free flow of thought. The thought cannot be restricted. The moment you restrict the thought, you become stagnant society. You can see which societies are stagnant if you take out the map and see. The societies which are the maximum they might be having money. I'm not mincing words, but if you see in thought process wise, scientifically, take the example of Pakistan. Pakistan became obsessed with religion.
Yeah.
They invented an imaginary past.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that everything good flows from only one form of thought process.
Yeah.
They fought among themselves on different minute interpretation of their own religion. And see where the country has reached. Do we want to go into that path? We perhaps, if we remain India as India without having the bloodshed what the Europe gave to the world, we remain India in our heart and we imitate the brain of Europe, we can perhaps show a different path. The European brain, European intellect, in the last 200 years, I will not talk about 2000 years, last 200, 250 years. And when I say Europe, I include America also because it comes from the same cultural system.
Yeah.
Take the number of patents, take the number of the scientific progress which is even now happening. Everything what we are using now, I'm not talking about what Einstein did or Newton did, even though all of them found the base. Even now, from the internet to everything, it is dominated by the inventions from the West. What are we talking about? Why are we closing our eyes to all these things?
So, when you refer to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata as texts or epics that shaped the future of a civilization, would you say it is still able to, because we, as you rightly pointed, there are people who minimize it as a historical account which they can brag about. But let's ignore that group of people because they do have a voice. But let's move to another opportunity, which is, do these texts have the power, the relevance to shape India's future as of today?
Definitely. They're still shaping the future as of today. But
Okay.
the moment you start interpreting them like any other religious text, they lose that power.
Right. So
They
how
lose that
can...
power and they will become like, we have to use them like how they were used for the last 4,000, 5,000 years.
So someone who's not aware of it and has
So I
been
will
misled.
tell it like this. I will tell it like this. When you say, take the example of Ramayana. Ramayana has so many interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
So many of them. And they evolved over 4,000, 5,000 years. In every language, every poet have written it in their way. Like, I don't know, in Kannada, Kuvempu's Ramayana, he comes up with a different interpretation for Sita's Agni-Pariksha.
Mm-hmm.
So every event, I'm just telling it as an example. Since you are a Kannadiga, I just took that example, thinking that perhaps you might be familiar with it.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
every writer, every saint, every poet interpreted this Ramayana and Mahabharata to suit the society and the times. Now, Veerappa Moily had written the Kannada poetry in about Ramayana, 2 books. He gave a totally different interpretation in that. I'm not talking about even the English writers like us who are interpreting and who are more read. But in every Indian language, every writer, every saint has interpreted it to suit it for the times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we were able to do that because we took it as a cultural and an ethical text.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you call it like it is an equivalent of Quran or Bible, this kind of interpretations is not possible. Because there will be people who will get offended, you cannot have any creative liberty. So what happens, it just becomes a religion. It loses its power to shape our thoughts Because in my childhood, how I used to hear Ramayana is that the Ramayana was not told as an instructional test. It was a debate.
Mm.
In the sense that they will tell the text and then they will leave it to your interpretation on uh, arriving at what is right for you. So that is why, if you see, Ramayana or Mahabharata have not hidden any flaws of any of the heroes
Right.
or characters. What was the need for Valmiki if it was just an instructional text to show that Rama killed Bali by hiding behind a tree?
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine, imagine that Valmiki is writing this, or any poet for that matter. Vyasa is writing this. What is the need for Vyasa to tell that Drona was killed by telling a lie?
Right.
Right. It's not an instructional text now. What it is teaching us is that there will be circumstances in each of our lives. So the greatest of Mahabharata or Ramayana is that you take any character, look at the things which they are going through in their life. It's a life biography of each of them. And you will find that there is some similarity to something in your life which is happening. At least one character you will find for any incident which is happening. And you will be able to, it is like a compass or a milestone.
Right.
It shows you the way. It is up to you to choose that path or choose another path. But these are the guideposts which is doing it. That is how it has helped us. So some people will see bhakti in it, devotion in it. That is also accepted because it is going to give you peace of mind, and you believe that by devotional songs, singing and praying, that path, bhakti marga, is accepted. Some people will start arguing this is right or this is wrong. They use logic and try to achieve at what is comfortable and convenient for them. That is jnana marga. Some people will think that, okay, he has done like this, I will also do like that. That becomes karma marga. All paths are accepted. The moment you lose that freedom, it just becomes an instructional text that Ram did this, you also do that. Otherwise, we will kill you.
That's the danger, right?
That's a danger.
So you do something in your books which is talk about the other side, and you talk about the losers, the story from their perspective. So what was the reason that drove that decision for you as an author?
See, it is not that I write only from the other side. I've written a lot of television and films and other things in which I have told the story, like some of the countries, perhaps the most watched television series based on Ramayana and Mahabharata, and also I am working on something else, were written by me, like Siya Ke Ram, Mahabali Hanuman, which came in all languages and all in Sony TV. So it's not that I write only from one side. I write from every side. I will put it like that. I write from every side. I'm just following the tradition, the very traditional way, where that is why you see that in many of the Shiva temples, you still find Ravana's Murti there. Ravana also will be there in many of the temples.
Yeah.
There are temples for Duryodhana. So these were never considered until we got westernized. None of these characters were considered as evil per se. They were considered as people who perhaps did a wrong choice and they are paying the price for it. Rather than, there is no concept of pure evil, like Satan concept is not there in any of the Indian tradition. There is no concept of Satan.
Okay.
Heaven or hell or Satan concept is not there at all. So I am trying to bring the age-old perspective of showing it from every side, so that I'm not preaching, saying that this is the right thing. I'm just saying, okay, this is the angle, think from this angle. Because that is why these texts were written like that. There was a reason why these sages had written everything, right? In the sense that Karna is killed in a very unfair way. Drona is killed in a very unfair way. So they are not hiding anything. No, they are not saying this is the right or that is wrong. And these are the points where they are putting, where they want us to pause and then debate and discuss either in our mind or between each other and arrive at our truths. So these are like exercise books. They are not guide books. They are not instructional books. They are more like a question paper what you get, no? You have to
Multiple
give your
choice.
answers. Not even multiple choice. Multiple choices, you have got only 4 or 5 choices.
I mean,
This is like,
yeah.
you have to give your answers.
Right,
It's like
right,
writing
right.
essays. No, you have to think and give your answers.
Right.
So these are all samasyas actually, rather than just instructions. And that is why they are holy, because they can be, everybody can have their own Ramayana and Mahabharata because of that. That's the beauty of it.
That's actually beautiful, yeah. Yeah, so I want to talk about a couple of things before we wind up today. One, you had mentioned, this idea of a guild-based, caste-based society which had industry, and I'm not sure if you're comfortable taking this, but I'm curious to know, what is your position on the past of the caste system, and what is and this might seem as an ignorant question, and I apologize in advance. And does it deserve to be demonized as much as it is being today?
Caste, what it evolved, it needs to not just be demonized, it needs to be destroyed.
Right.
What it evolved, what it started, that's a different thing. Many of the caste system and the discriminations got consolidated during the British period. I'm not blaming British for the caste. Caste was always there. Even in Mahabharata, you can see the caste discrimination.
Right.
The glimpses of caste discrimination. And the medieval text started adding many things to justify the caste system into the text. So which we can clearly see. If you read it, the language changes. Like Uttaraganta of Ramayana is clearly, somebody has inserted it, which many scholars agree also. So it has got so many controversial things. Most of the controversial things in Ramayana is in the Uttaraganta, including abandoning of Sita, killing of Shambhuga for learning Vedas. Shudra is killed for learning Vedas. All these things Rama kills a Shudra called Shambhuga for reading Vedas. All these things were inserted by Western interests, and it was and is still one of the most horrible systems invented by man. So when we talk about glory of civilization, we should also talk about the rotten things in our civilization. Then only we can go forward.
Yeah.
What politicians use it for on either side, that's a different debate altogether. But if you are at the bottom of the pyramid, then only we will know how oppressive this is. But one thing what many people miss when they talk about caste is, it is not like the race of black and white or anything like that, like the white race oppressing the black. Because in caste system, there is nothing called the oppressor and the oppressed. Everyone is an oppressor and the oppressed. This is a very complicated complicated truth, if I may say. That is, there were so many gradations, at least by the time where we are reached now, or at least say in the 1940s, before 47, before the Constitution came, in 1950, before that, there were so many gradations. So even the classes which we call as, which come in the scheduled class categories, they also followed caste system. Even now, many villages, they do that. And while you will have 20 castes oppressing you, you will have another 10 castes who are below you, and you will oppress them. You will not intermarry them. So it is not that, it is not black and white like the upper caste oppressed the lower caste. There was no concept like, there were a huge ladder of castes.
Okay.
Who is an upper caste, or among Brahmins itself in Kerala had around 60 castes. And some of them cannot touch the caste just above that. Some of them above that cannot touch the caste above it. It was so, that's why Vivekananda called it a madhouse, right? Because of the caste system. It's like a madhouse.
Right.
Who can keep track of this? It had evolved into such a way that who can stand how many feet away? People were wasting times on this kind of bullshit. If you are in this, which caste, you are in so and so caste and I am this caste, you cannot come near me. So it is a brutal system which sucked away the vitality of India. And India's fall is associated with the strengthening of caste system. Just take the history, for example. India was the most populous country for most part of history. Yet a handful of invaders could come and conquer us. Why? Because only one caste was allowed to fight.
Right.
Right. Only one caste or one group of caste who came in particular Varna was allowed to fight. So what you essentially do is there is no fighting force of the 99% of the people.
Mm.
This is an open invitation for invaders to come.
Yeah.
So what caste system became is ruthless and brutal. Whether the medicine we are giving for it to correct it, that's a different debate. But I will always hold caste and the way it evolved to be responsible for most of the ills in India. And even the poverty which we witness, even though poverty cuts across all castes, if you draw it like a statistical curve, you find that most of the poor people in the country, majority of them, at least 70-80% of them, will belong to, as you go down in the caste ladder, you will find more number of poor people. It doesn't mean that the so-called upper caste doesn't have poor because of the India's population. Lot of poor people are there, especially in the poorer states of the north. Lot of poor people are there in every caste. But you can just look at, it's an obvious thing, no? You look at who is your maid, who is your driver, who is the security guard. I'm not saying others are not there, but as a statistical thing, you just check it out.
Yeah.
Majority of them, still caste is a reality in most part of the country. I am not a person, I don't belong to a community which was oppressed because of caste system. Or not totally oppressed, because there were other castes which were supposed to be above us or anything. But these questions should be asked to the people who have really faced the brunt of caste.
Yeah.
And reading Ambedkar is very essential and important for that. Because Ambedkar is somebody who I don't agree with Ambedkar on many things. I don't agree with anyone on many things. Or a lot of things.
Yeah.
That freedom of mind we should have. No, I don't agree with Gandhiji with everything. I don't agree with Ambedkar for everything. I don't agree with anyone for everything. Or whether Ramayana, Mahabharata, everything. We have to keep our independent mind.
Absolutely.
But where Ambedkar becomes important as much as Gandhiji or as much as any other leader of that era is that he brings a voice which is not often heard. And he is telling it from the first-hand experience. If you can't respect that, if you can't at least sympathize with that, we don't have any right to call ourselves Indians.
Yeah. No, that was such a, I think, informative response because, again, you know, it's very limited what you hear. It's always the forecast. It's very black and white. But this was such a deep, well thought through answer because it really got me thinking because whether we talk about the Ramayana, the ancient texts, these are things that are evolved by people of the time into this system which really has damaged not the integrity and the fiber and the fabric of our country, but also has been so oppressive and the injustice to so many people who are still reeling from it will go unanswered if we just kind of focus on the pride of the past or the pride of what it was as opposed to what it became. So thanks for that response. And on a different note, I didn't want to interrupt you earlier about the multiple versions of the Ramayana playing out simultaneously or playing out in the past or playing out in the future. Would you agree when I would refer to that as the Ramayana or the Mahabharata acknowledging in its wisdom or in its interpretation the existence of multiple universes and the multiverse as we call it?
There are many stories which talks about the time. See, certain things what we should really take pride about is the depth of thoughts which Indians always, the ancient Indians always reached. So ours was not an experimental culture. So we might not have given proofs, but the imagination was so vast. So this story of multiple universe and multiple verses and the relativity of time, they are so beautiful in all this poetry that it is not just one text. It comes from Upanishads to Vedas to Puranas to ancient Tamil literature to so many of them. This concept comes. The Siddhas talk about it. So there is this story where one king went to the Brahma to find a daughter, find a groom for his daughter. And at that time in the Brahma Sabha, there was some music concert going on. So he waited for 5 minutes. When the song was finished, the Brahma asked him, why have you come here? And he says that I come searching for a groom. And Brahma starts laughing. And he asks, why are you laughing? And Brahma says, there is a time difference between earth and this place. By the time you have come here, 60,000 years have passed on earth. And all the generations, your daughter, all so many of them are over, gone. By the time you go back, another 60,000 years would have gone. This is our present day physics, right?
Yeah.
If you really think. So this kind of stories suddenly jump out from this beautiful poetry and everything. So the depth of our philosophical thought is something which gives me goosebumps when I read all these things.
Yeah, because sometimes, when you read about, the mission to the moon or the new launch to observe the sun, and, I'm not a trained scientist, but my limited understanding is through the school I went and how maths and physics were taught, and you understand certain positions and certain measurements and certain concept of time. But do these texts even have the possibility of changing your perception of what time means? Because we count it by the second, the minute, the year. But can it be...
Definitely.
Right.
Because in our Puranas, the time is a cycle. We tend to, at least the way we are all trained, we think about linear time. That's why we are talking to history and other things. Why Indians never bothered about history is because they never considered time as a linear thing. It's Kala Chakra always.
Right.
And the god is Mahakala, the Lord of Time. That's why Shiva is called Mahakala. No? It's the Lord of Time, the one who destroys time. So many meanings come in that. So time, the beauty of time, there are a lot of beautiful, the nature of time, I think, the book, it is very similar to many concepts in Vedas. The modern, many books which talks on time are very similar to how time is talked about in many of our Puranas and Vedas.
I'm usually a person who spends more time in the gray and not stress about the black and the white. And I try to keep an open mind and, keep challenging my opinions and my things. And this conversation with you has, led me to spend more time in the gray. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to ask you about, if I want to read some of these books, the texts, let's call them, and I don't, read Kannada, I don't obviously speak or read Sanskrit. Are there books in English that someone like me who's interested can find?
See, I can tell you. I will show you. One is Radhakrishnan's, these 2 volumes. You see, introduction, volume of Indian philosophy, gives a glimpse of thing. In a lot of English books are available, but for a beginner, this should be a good one. Dr. Radhakrishnan's S. Radhakrishnan's book. So many of our freedom fighters were great scholars.
Right.
So most of them are great writers also. That's what is unique about our freedom fighters. They were great scholars and writers, whether it is Radhakrishnan or Nehru or Ambedkar. All of them have written so many books. Or Gandhiji has written so many books. So many of them, from Srinivasa Shastri to so many of them have written. Rajagopalachari has written books. So many of them have written very deep books, in fact. So this is one thing which, there are other books, but initially I said it will give you a glimpse of Upanishads.
Right.
Radhakrishnan's Principal Upanishads also is there.
Okay.
Which also, that is another book. This also could be a good beginning for getting a glimpse of what is Upanishads. Don't go in search of science. Go in search of idea. Don't go in search of atom bombs and flying machines in that.
I think that's a good recommendation. And what do you have planned as author Anand Neelakantan? What do you have in the pipeline that people who've read your previous books can look forward to?
One children's book is coming. Then one non-fiction self-help book is coming, which is called the Asura Way. That is the materialistic Indian philosophy, how to live life like Asuras. The contrarian approach. Why greed is good, why ambition is good, why you should not be contented in life. So this, I'm just giving the perspective from the other side, where all the gurus are telling no that you should be. What all gurus are telling, I am giving the ancient Indian thought, which had always celebrated life. So the Asura way that is coming.
I'd love to have you
Then
back on the podcast when that book is out. I'd like to read it, and I'd like to get your wisdom on that way of life, because everything you hear about now is authenticity, simplicity, and I hear a lot about that on this show when I talk to people. But I'd love a contrarian position on this and where we're headed if we do, just pursue everything material, and where will that lead us, and where will that take us? Excellent. So this has been.
Then there are films and shows which are coming up. So all those things are there.
That's a lot of body of work that, I think you spent your time working on. So thank you so much for educating me, enlightening me. And I'm sure everyone listening has also, got insights into things that they thought they knew, but hey, clearly not. So I appreciate it, Anand. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you liked what you heard, please do check out the other episodes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And I would much appreciate it if you could like the video, share it with people who you think might enjoy it. And of course, do subscribe to the channel, because it will help me and the podcast grow and reach more people just like you. So thanks again. Appreciate it.